The wind cut through the Montana territory like a blade made of ice and broken promises. Evelyn Vale had stopped feeling the cold 3 days ago. That was when the last sensation in her fingertips died, right around the same time she'd buried what remained of her hope in the same frozen ground that held her father's body. 24 years old, and she was burying her third corpse of the week. The first had been Samuel, one of the ranch hands who'd lasted exactly 9 days after her father died before stealing a horse and vanishing into the January darkness. They found him 2 miles south, frozen solid against a pine tree, still clutching the bottle of whiskey he'd chosen over survival. The second was Marcus, who'd simply stopped waking up one morning. Heart gave out, the town doctor said. Evelyn knew better. Men didn't die from bad hearts out here. They died from giving up. Now she stood over the third grave, watching 2 remaining ranch hands shovel half-frozen dirt over old Joe Pruitt, who'd worked this land since before Evelyn could walk. Pneumonia, technically. Reality? This godforsaken valley had finally collected what it was owed. That's the last of them, Tom Hendricks said, leaning on his shovel like it was the only thing keeping him vertical. His face was gray beneath 3 weeks of unwashed beard. Ain't nobody left but us now, Miss Vale. Us meant 3 people. Tom, his younger brother Danny, and Evelyn herself. 3 people trying to hold together a ranch that needed 20. 3 people standing between 200 head of starving cattle and a winter that showed no signs of mercy. We'll manage, Evelyn said. Tom didn't answer. He just looked at her with those hollow eyes that said what everybody in Red Hollow had been saying since her father's funeral. A woman's got no business trying to run a frontier ranch alone. Especially not this ranch. Especially not this valley. The Vale Ranch sat on 4,000 acres of the most unforgiving land in the Montana Territory. A wind-scoured stretch of prairie wedged between the Bitterroot Mountains and a town that barely qualified as civilization. Her grandfather had claimed it in 1861, built an empire through sheer stubborn refusal to die, and passed it to her father with explicit instructions. Never surrender this ground. Her father had kept that promise for 42 years. Now the responsibility had fallen to Evelyn, whether she wanted it or not, whether she could handle it or not. Miss Vale. Danny Hendricks stepped forward, hat in his frozen hands. He was 19, barely old enough to grow proper facial hair. Tom and we've been talking. Evelyn's stomach turned to lead. Town's offering good wages at the lumber mill, Danny continued, not meeting her eyes. Warm bunkhouse, 3 meals a day, and you're leaving. Evelyn's voice came out flat. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. It ain't about the money, Tom said quickly. It's just, Miss Vale, your father was a good man, best I ever worked for. But this ranch is dying. The cattle are starving. The barn roof collapsed last week. We got wolves taking calves every night, and Blackthorn's men have been... I know what Blackthorn's men have been doing. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I've seen the cut fences, the poisoned wells, the supply wagons that never make it past Iron Creek. Tom looked at the ground. Then you know this fight's already lost. My grandfather didn't think so. Neither did my father. Your grandfather had 20 men and a decade of peace to build this place, Tom said, voice rising. Your father had resources, respect, and the backing of every rancher in the valley. You got... He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Say it, Evelyn said softly. Miss Vale, say what I've got, Tom. The older man's shoulders sagged. You got a name that used to mean something, a ranch that's falling apart, and a valley full of people who think you should have sold out the day your father died. Silence settled over the graves like fresh snow. We'll finish the week, Tom said finally. Give you time to figure things out. But come Sunday, Danny and I are headed to town. I'm sorry, Miss Vale. I truly am. They walked away before Evelyn could respond, their boots crunching through frozen crust toward the bunkhouse that would stand empty by week's end. Evelyn stood alone among the graves as twilight bled across the valley. 3 wooden crosses marked the men she'd buried this month. 30 more crosses dotted the hillside beyond, ranch hands, neighbors, family members claimed by this brutal land over 6 decades. Her father's grave was the newest of the old ones, fresh pine planks already weathering gray. She'd carved the marker herself because the town carpenter refused to ride out during blizzard season. William James Vale, 1841 to 1883. He held the line. I don't know how to do this without you, Evelyn whispered to the frozen ground. The wind was her only answer. She turned back toward the ranch house, a two-story structure her grandfather had built from hand-hewn logs, sturdy enough to withstand 40 Montana winters, but showing its age in sagging porches and cracked window frames. Smoke rose from the chimney. At least she still had firewood. At least she still had walls. At least she still had... The sound hit her like a fist. Gunshots. 3 of them, rapid, deliberate, coming from the direction of the north pasture. Evelyn ran. Her father's rifle was still propped against the porch railing where she'd left it that morning. She grabbed it without breaking stride, boots skidding on ice-slicked ground as she sprinted toward the sound. More shots, closer now, and underneath them, something worse, cattle screaming. She crested the ridge above the north pasture and her heart stopped. 4 riders, all wearing Blackthorn syndicate colors, black coats with red armbands, had driven a dozen cattle against the fence line. They weren't stealing them. They were shooting them. Methodically, professionally. Like they were punching a clock at the world's cruelest job. One of the riders saw Evelyn and raised a hand. The shooting stopped. Evening, Miss Vale. The speaker was a weasel-faced man named Pike, one of Silas Blackthorn's favorite hired guns. Shame about these cattle. Looks like they got into some bad feed. Those cattle were fine this morning. Were they? Pike smiled. Funny how quick things can turn bad out here. Almost like this valley's trying to tell you something. Evelyn raised the rifle. Pike's smile widened. Now, Miss Vale, we both know you ain't gonna shoot an unarmed man. Unarmed? Evelyn glanced at the revolver on Pike's hip. You're wearing a gun. This old thing? Pike patted the weapon. Just for show. We're not looking for trouble. Mr. Blackthorn asked us to ride by, check if you'd reconsidered his generous offer. Tell Blackthorn my answer hasn't changed. $20,000 is a lot of money for a woman alone. This ranch is worth 4 times that, and you know it. Pike shrugged. Maybe, but worth and value ain't the same thing, are they? Ranch is only worth what you can keep it running, and from where I'm standing, he gestured at the dead cattle, the collapsing fences, the empty pastures. Don't look like you're keeping much running at all. Evelyn's finger moved to the trigger. Easy now. Pike raised both hands in mock surrender. We're leaving. But Miss Vale? Winter's only halfway done. Lot can happen between now and spring. Lot of accidents. Lot of bad luck. His eyes glittered. Shame if something happened to those last 2 ranch hands of yours. Tom and Danny, isn't it? Nice boys. Be terrible if they got caught in a storm, or stumbled into a frozen river, or... The rifle shot split the air. Pike's hat flew off his head, spinning into the snow 20 feet away with a bullet hole dead center. The 4 riders froze. Evelyn pumped another round into the chamber, the metallic sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Next one's lower. Pike's face had gone white. You crazy bitch! Get off my land! Mr. Blackthorn's gonna... Get off my land. They rode away fast, Pike shouting threats over his shoulder that got swallowed by distance and wind. Evelyn held the rifle steady until they disappeared beyond the southern ridge. Then her hands started shaking. She'd just threatened Silas Blackthorn's men, put a bullet through Pike's hat in front of witnesses, given them exactly the excuse they needed to come back with more men, more guns, more violence. Her father would have handled it differently, smarter, quieter. Her father was dead. Evelyn walked back to the house as the last light died. Tom and Danny were waiting on the porch, faces pale. We heard the shots, Tom said. Blackthorn's men. They killed a dozen cattle. Evelyn propped the rifle against the wall. Threatened you both by name. The brothers exchanged a look. We're leaving tonight, Danny said quietly. Can't wait till Sunday. I'm sorry, Miss Vale, but... I understand. And she did. Truly. What loyalty did they owe her? They'd worked for her father, not her. They had families in town. Lives to protect. Take whatever supplies you need. I'll pay you through the end of the month. You don't have to... I said I'll pay you. Evelyn's voice was sharp. You worked honestly. You'll be paid honestly. Tom opened his mouth, closed it, then said, Your father was right about you. Said you had more iron in your spine than any man in the valley. My father said a lot of things. Evelyn stared at the darkening mountains. Most of them got him killed. They left within the hour. Evelyn stood on the porch and watched their wagon disappear into the darkness, taking the last of her working hands with them. The ranch fell silent except for the wind and the distant howling of wolves that had learned the valley's cattle were poorly defended. She was alone now. Completely, impossibly alone. 4,000 acres, 200 cattle, one woman, and a winter that had at least 8 weeks left to kill her. Evelyn walked inside, barred the door, and sat at her father's desk surrounded by ledgers that documented 40 years of struggle. The numbers told a story she didn't want to read. Depleted savings, mounting debts, supply costs that had tripled since Blackthorn started his campaign of economic strangulation. Even if she survived the winter, she couldn't afford spring. Her father's final letter sat in the desk's top drawer. She'd read it 100 times, searching for answers that weren't there. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The ranch is yours now, along with all the weight that carries. I wish I could have prepared you better. Wish I could have left you something easier. But this land isn't about easy. It's about worth. And you, my girl, are worth more than you know. I've made arrangements. A man named Rowan Creed will arrive after my death. He's rough, dangerous. Not the kind of man you'd choose for yourself, but he's capable, and he owes me a debt he'll honor. I've arranged your marriage to him. The contract is legal and binding. He'll help you hold this ranch through whatever comes. Trust him, even when you shouldn't. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a different life, but I'm not sorry I gave you this one. Your father. Evelyn had torn the house apart looking for this contract her father mentioned. Found nothing. No legal documents. No proof. Just a dead man's letter making promises a grave couldn't keep. And yet, she stared out the window at the snow-covered valley, at the ridge where her family's grave stood sentinel, at the mountains that had killed better people than her. What choice did she have? Sell to Blackthorn and become exactly what everyone expected? Another woman too weak to hold frontier ground? Or stay? And die trying to prove them wrong. The knock came at midnight. 3 heavy strikes against the door. Deliberate, patient, like whoever stood outside had all the time in the world. Evelyn grabbed the rifle and approached the door. Who's there? Name's Rowan Creed. The voice was deep, rough-edged, with an accent she couldn't place. Your father sent me. Evelyn's blood turned cold. My father's dead. I know, that's why I'm here. She cracked the door open, rifle barrel first. How did you know he was dead? Letter reached me 6 weeks ago. Took me a month to settle affairs and another 2 weeks to ride through this hell of a winter. The man stepped into the lantern light, and Evelyn's breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair, gray eyes cold as January ice, and a wicked scar across his throat that looked like someone had tried to kill him and nearly succeeded. He wore a long coat crusted with snow, a wide-brimmed hat, and enough weapons to outfit a small militia. You're the man my father arranged. It wasn't a question. According to this, I am. He held up a document, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. Official legal paper, witness signatures, her father's handwriting clear as day. Marriage contract between Evelyn Sarah Vale and Rowan James Creed, executed this 15th day of November, 1882. This is insane, Evelyn whispered. Probably. Rowan's expression didn't change. But it's legal. Your father offered me land, resources, and a stake in this ranch in exchange for helping you hold it through his death. I accepted. Terms are binding. You can't just... I don't even know you. Your father did. Rowan glanced past her at the ranch house. He said you'd need help. Said Blackthorn would come at you hard the moment he died. Said the valley would turn on you because you're a woman trying to hold ground most men can't manage. His cold eyes found hers again. Was he right? Evelyn's jaw tightened. Get off my property. Can't. Contract says I stay until the ranch is secured or you're dead. He tilted his head slightly. Which you will be, by the way. Probably within 3 weeks, judging by what I saw riding in. I don't need... Your north fence is cut in 17 places. You've got wolves denning less than a mile from your main herd. Your barn roof collapsed. Your well's been poisoned. I could smell it from the road. You just lost your last 2 hands, and Blackthorn's men have been riding past every night counting down till you break. Evelyn stared at him. How do you know all that? Because I've been watching this valley for 5 days. Rowan's voice was utterly calm. waiting to see if you'd survive long enough to be worth saving. And? You shot Pike's hat off today. That was stupid. He threatened my... I know what he threatened. I was watching from the ridge. Something that might have been approval flickered in those cold eyes. Stupid, but brave. Your father said you had spine. Looks like he was right. Evelyn wanted to throw him off the porch, wanted to send him back into the blizzard he'd ridden out of. But she couldn't ignore the document in his hand or the cold mathematics of her situation. Alone, she'd be dead by spring. With this dangerous stranger, she might have a chance. If I agree to this, she said slowly, what exactly do you get out of it? Partnership, stake in the ranch, legal protection from people looking for me. What people? The kind you don't ask about. Rowan met her stare without flinching. I'm not a good man, Miss Vale. Your father knew that, but I'm a capable one, and right now capability matters more than virtue. Why did my father trust you? Because I saved his life once, and because he saved mine. Rowan's expression darkened. We had an understanding. He called in that debt before he died. This is me paying it. Snow swirled between them. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled. The contract says marriage, Evelyn said. Does that mean? It means legal partnership, protection under territorial law. Nothing more, unless you decide otherwise. Rowan's voice was flat. I'm not here for romance, Miss Vale. I'm here because your father was the only man in 15 years who gave a damn whether I lived or died. This is the last thing he asked of me. So I'm asking you, do you want to survive? Or do you want to die proving you don't need help? Evelyn looked at this scarred stranger her father had sent. This dangerous man with winter in his eyes and violence in every line of his body. Every instinct screamed not to trust him. Every practical bone in her body said she couldn't afford not to. One condition, she said finally. Name it. You ever threaten me, raise a hand to me, or try to take this ranch from me, I'll kill you myself. Rowan almost smiled. Fair enough. I mean it. I believe you. He gestured at the rifle still pointed at his chest. You gonna let me in, or am I sleeping in the barn? Evelyn stepped aside. Rowan Creed walked into her life like winter itself, cold, dangerous, and impossible to stop. Behind him, the blizzard swallowed the night. And somewhere in the darkness, Silas Blackthorn's riders watched the ranch house and made their plans. The war for Red Hollow Valley had begun. Rowan didn't sleep that first night. Evelyn gave him her father's room, a sparse quarters with a narrow bed, a trunk of old clothes, and a window facing east toward the mountains. She'd expected him to collapse after riding through a blizzard, maybe ask for food or whiskey or some basic courtesy. Instead, he dropped his gear, checked every window lock in the house, and disappeared back into the storm. She found him 3 hours later in the barn, working by lantern light to repair the collapsed section of roof. His coat was off despite the cold, and she could see the lean muscle of someone who'd spent years surviving on the edge of starvation and violence. You should rest, Evelyn said from the doorway. Roof won't fix itself. Rowan didn't look down from where he was nailing support beams. And you've got 30 head of cattle that'll freeze if this barn doesn't hold. It's midnight. Weather doesn't care what time it is. He drove another nail home with 3 precise strikes. You want to survive out here? You work when the work needs doing, not when it's convenient. Evelyn climbed the ladder anyway, tools in hand. Then I'll help. Rowan finally looked at her. You know how to roof a barn? My father taught me when I was 12, said every rancher should know how their operation works from ground to rafters. She met his eyes. So yes, I know how to roof a barn. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Not quite approval, but close. Fair enough. Hand me those shingles. They worked in silence until dawn, the only sounds the hammer strikes and wind howling through gaps in the walls. When the sun finally broke over the mountains, the roof was patched and the cattle below were already warmer. Evelyn's hands were bleeding. Rowan's were worse. Neither of them mentioned it. Breakfast? She offered. Need to check the fence lines first, and the well. Rowan climbed down, already moving toward his next task. That poison won't clear itself. How do you know it's poisoned? Could just be sulfur deposits. Sulfur doesn't smell like arsenic. He grabbed his coat. Someone dumped at least 5 pounds into your water supply, probably 2 weeks ago, judging by dispersal. You've been drinking from the creek? Evelyn nodded, suddenly cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Smart. Keep doing that. Rowan paused at the door. Who supplies your ranch? General store in town? Red Hollow Mercantile. Why? Because whoever poisoned your well knew exactly where it was and how much arsenic to use without killing you immediately. That's not random sabotage. That's someone with detailed knowledge of your operation. His gray eyes were hard. You trust the mercantile owner? Samuel Potts? He's been supplying this ranch for 20 years. People change when money's involved. Rowan pulled his hat low. Or when they're scared. I'll ride into town today, see what I can learn. People don't talk to strangers here. I'm not asking them to talk. I'm asking them to show me what they're hiding. He almost smiled. There's a difference. He left before Evelyn could respond. She stood in the barn doorway watching him ride toward Red Hollow, this stranger her father had trusted, and wondered what kind of man could identify poison by smell and fix a roof in a blizzard without complaint. The kind of man who'd done both before, she realized. The kind who'd survived things that would have killed softer people. The town of Red Hollow wasn't much to look at. A single main street lined with weathered buildings. A saloon that doubled as the town hall. A church nobody attended anymore. And the mercantile that served as the valley's lifeline to civilization. Rowan tied his horse outside the saloon and walked in like he owned the place. Conversation died instantly. 15 men turned to stare at the stranger with the scarred throat and cold eyes. Rowan counted 3 of them wearing blackthorn colors. The rest were locals, ranchers, mill workers, the kind of hard-worn men the frontier produced like weeds. Whiskey, Rowan said to the bartender. The man didn't move. We don't serve drifters. Good thing I'm not drifting. Rowan placed a gold coin on the bar. I'm staying, whiskey. The bartender glanced at the coin, then at the blackthorn men, then poured the drink with shaking hands. Rowan took it to a corner table and waited. It didn't take long. The largest of Blackthorn's men, a bull-necked brute with scarred knuckles and mean eyes, stood up and walked over. You the one shacked up with the Vale woman? I'm the one married to her, legally. Rowan sipped his whiskey. You got a problem with legal marriages? I got a problem with strangers thinking they can walk into this valley and what? Rowan's voice dropped to something dangerous. Protect their own property? Work their own land? Seems reasonable to me. The brute's face reddened. That land ain't going to be hers much longer. Mr. Blackthorn's made a generous offer. 20,000 for property worth 80. Rowan set down his glass. That's not generous. That's robbery with paperwork. You calling Mr. Blackthorn a thief? I'm calling him a businessman. Smart one, too. Buy up failing ranches for pennies. Consolidate water rights. Control the valley. Rowan leaned back. It's a solid strategy. Just doesn't account for people refusing to sell. The brute stepped closer. Maybe you ain't heard what happens to people who refuse. Oh, I've heard. Poisoned wells, cut fences, dead cattle, mysterious accidents. Rowan's eyes went cold. You boys aren't exactly subtle. The room had gone dead silent. You got a mouth on you, the brute said slowly. Might need teaching some manners. Might. Rowan stood up, but probably not from you. The punch came fast. The brute was quicker than he looked, but Rowan was faster. He slipped the blow, caught the man's wrist, and twisted hard. Something cracked. The brute screamed and dropped to his knees. The other 2 Blackthorn men reached for their guns. Rowan had his revolver out before they cleared leather. Sit down, he said quietly. They sat. Rowan looked at the brute still cradling his broken wrist. Tell Blackthorn the Vale Ranch isn't for sale. Not for 20,000. Not for 100,000. Not ever. He holstered his weapon. And tell him the next man who rides onto that property uninvited gets buried there. He walked out into the cold morning air, leaving absolute silence behind him. The bartender finally spoke. Someone should tell Mr. Blackthorn about this. Someone will, said one of the locals. Question is whether it helps or makes things worse. Back at the ranch, Evelyn was discovering exactly how much work 3 people couldn't do. The cattle needed feeding. The fences needed repair. The water supply needed hauling from the creek since the well was poisoned. Firewood needed splitting. The chickens needed tending. The horses needed care. And somewhere in all that, she needed to eat, sleep, and figure out how to survive the next 6 weeks of winter. She was carrying her 4th bucket of water from the creek when her arms finally gave out. The bucket hit the frozen ground and cracked, water spilling everywhere. Evelyn sat down in the snow and wanted to cry. She didn't, because crying didn't fix anything. Her father had taught her that. Crying was for people who had time for feelings. Ranchers had time for work. But right now, sitting in the snow with broken buckets and bleeding hands, she understood why Tom and Danny had left. This wasn't sustainable. This was slow suicide dressed up as perseverance. You need to pace yourself. Evelyn's head snapped up. Rowan was back, leading his horse toward the barn. She hadn't even heard him approach. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're exhausted. There's a difference. He dismounted and walked over, surveying the spilled water and cracked bucket. How many trips have you made? 4, maybe 5. How many do you need? Another 6 to fill the troughs. Evelyn stood up, brushing snow from her pants. But I'll manage. Stop saying that. Rowan's voice was sharp. You keep saying you'll manage. You're fine. You can handle it. Meanwhile, your hands are bleeding, you haven't eaten since yesterday, and you're about 12 hours from collapse. You asked for help. I'm here. Let me help. The words hit harder than Evelyn expected. She'd spent 3 weeks telling everyone she was fine. Telling herself she was fine. Pretending that sheer determination could replace food, sleep, and basic human limitations. I don't know how, she admitted quietly. Rowan tilted his head. How what? How to let someone help. My father always said asking for help was admitting weakness. Your father was wrong. Rowan picked up the broken bucket. Help isn't weakness, it's strategy. You can't hold 4,000 acres alone. Nobody can. That's not failure. That's mathematics. He walked toward the barn, already moving to the next task. Evelyn followed, something loosening in her chest that she didn't have words for. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Rowan worked like a machine, methodical, relentless, and utterly without complaint. He cleared the poisoned well and built a filtration system using charcoal and sand. He repaired 17 sections of cut fence and booby-trapped 3 more with tripwires and bells. He hunted deer and elk to supplement their dwindling food supplies. He taught Evelyn how to set snares for wolves and read weather patterns in cloud formations. And he never, not once, tried to take control. Every decision still came to Evelyn. Every plan required her approval. He offered options, explained consequences, and waited for her orders before acting. It drove her crazy. Why do you keep doing that? She demanded one evening after he'd spent 10 minutes explaining fence repair strategies instead of just fixing the fence. Doing what? Asking my permission for everything. You clearly know more about ranching than I do. Why not just do it? Rowan looked up from the harness he was mending. Because it's your ranch. The contract says I help you hold it, not that I take it over. His gray eyes were steady. Your father didn't send me here to replace him. He sent me to make sure you survived long enough to become what he knew you could be. And what's that? Someone who doesn't need me anymore. The words sat between them like stones. My father told you that? Evelyn asked quietly. He said you had more potential than any rancher in the valley. Said you were smart, tough, and too stubborn to quit. Rowan went back to his work. Also said you didn't believe any of that yourself. Said you'd spent your whole life being told women can't hold frontier land, and part of you believed it. He was wrong. Was he? Rowan glanced up. Because from where I'm sitting, you're working yourself to death trying to prove something to people who will never respect you anyway. That's not strength. That's fear dressed up as determination. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about... I know what fear looks like. I've worn it myself. Rowan set down the harness. You're afraid that if you fail, everyone was right about you, that you're not good enough, strong enough, man enough to hold what your father built. So you're killing yourself rather than admit you need help. He stood up. But needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And the sooner you figure that out, the sooner we can actually save this place. He walked out before Evelyn could respond. She sat alone in the house, his words echoing in her head, and hated that he was right. The attack came 3 nights later. Rowan woke to the smell of smoke and had his boots on before his mind caught up to instinct. He grabbed his rifle and burst into the hallway just as Evelyn emerged from her room, already armed. The barn, she said. They ran. Orange flames licked the night sky, and through the smoke Rowan could see figures on horseback circling the structure. not trying to put out the fire, watching it burn. How many? Evelyn asked, voice deadly calm. 6, maybe 7. Rowan counted riders through the smoke. They're just watching, waiting for us to panic. What do we do? We don't panic. Rowan moved toward the water troughs. Start hauling buckets, I'll handle the riders. You can't fight 7 men alone. I'm not fighting them. I'm making them think twice about staying. He fired a shot into the air. The riders scattered, startled, then regrouped farther out. Go, save what you can. Evelyn ran. The next 20 minutes were chaos and smoke and burning wood. Evelyn hauled water until her arms screamed, throwing bucket after bucket onto flames that seemed to laugh at her efforts. The cattle were panicking, smashing against fences, and she could hear Rowan somewhere in the darkness firing shots to keep the riders at bay. Then the barn's main support beam cracked with a sound like thunder. Get out! Rowan's voice cut through the roar. Evelyn, get out now! She stumbled backward just as the roof collapsed inward, sending a column of sparks 50 feet into the night sky. The riders whooped and hollered, celebrating their destruction. Rowan fired 3 more shots, deliberately close this time. The riders scattered for real, vanishing into the darkness beyond the firelight. Silence fell, broken only by crackling flames and terrified cattle. Evelyn sank to her knees in the snow, watching 40 years of her family's work burn to ash. The barn her grandfather had built, the stalls where her father had taught her to gentle horses, the hayloft where she'd hidden as a child, reading books by stolen candlelight. All of it. Gone. We lost 30 head. Rowan appeared beside her, face black with soot. They scattered during the panic. Might get some back when it's light. Might not. How many does that leave? Maybe 170, if we're lucky. Evelyn did the math. They'd started winter with 200 cattle. That meant they'd lost 15% of their herd in one night. And the barn was irreplaceable. They had no shelter for the remaining cattle, no storage for feed, no protection from the weather. This was Blackthorn, she said. Probably. Rowan watched the flames. Though he'll deny it. Call it vandalism, bad luck. Maybe blame it on vagrants passing through. We should go to the marshal. Marshal's in Blackthorn's pocket, has been for 2 years. Rowan's voice was flat. You report this, he'll send deputies to investigate, they'll find nothing, and Blackthorn will use it as evidence that you can't protect your own property. Give him legal grounds to petition for seizure under territorial abandonment laws. That's insane. That's how empires are built. Legal theft. Rowan finally looked at her. Your father knew this. That's why he didn't fight Blackthorn in court. He fought him by refusing to break, by holding ground until Blackthorn gave up or died trying to take it. My father's dead. But you're not. The words hung in the cold air between them. What do we do? Evelyn asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. We rebuild. Not the barn. We don't have time or materials. But we build enough shelter to keep the cattle alive. We fortify what's left. We show Blackthorn this didn't break us. Rowan stood up. And then we make him pay. How? I'm still working on that part. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. They worked through the night and into the next day, salvaging what they could from the wreckage. Rowan rigged temporary shelters using salvaged boards and canvas tarps. Evelyn organized the surviving cattle into tighter groups closer to the house where they could defend them. By sunset, they'd done what they could. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Evelyn was washing soot from her hands when Rowan came in carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. Found this in what's left of the barn, he said. Thought you should see it. Evelyn unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal, singed at the edges but intact. Her father's handwriting covered every page. It's his ranch log, she breathed. I thought this burned years ago. Read the last entry. Evelyn flipped to the final page. The date was 3 days before her father died. Blackthorn came by today. Made his offer again. $20,000 for everything. Said it was his final price. Said if I didn't take it, accidents might start happening. Said the valley wasn't safe for stubborn old men. I told him to go to hell. He said that's where I was headed anyway. I think he's right. I can feel it in my bones. This winter's going to kill me. The cough won't stop. The pain won't ease. I'm dying, and we both know it. But Evelyn's stronger than she knows, smarter than I ever was. If she survives long enough to find her spine, she'll build something better than I ever could. That's why I sent for Rowan. He's the only man I trust to keep her alive until she figures that out. To whoever reads this after I'm gone, my daughter is not for sale. This ranch is not for sale. This valley belongs to the people who bleed for it, not the bastards who buy it with blood money. Hold the line. Evelyn closed the journal, eyes burning. He knew, she whispered. He knew Blackthorn would come after me. Knew I'd struggle. Knew I'd doubt myself. He also knew you'd survive. Rowan's voice was quiet. That's why he wasn't worried. He'd seen you survive worse than Winter, worse than Blackthorn. What's worse than this? Him dying. Rowan met her eyes. You loved your father. He knew losing him would break something in you. But he also knew you'd put yourself back together harder than before. That's what survivors do. They break. They rebuild. They come back stronger. I don't feel stronger. You're still here, aren't you? Rowan gestured at the ranch around them. Still standing, still fighting, that's strength, even if it doesn't feel like it. Evelyn looked at this scarred stranger her father had sent, this dangerous man who spoke about survival like he'd earned his degree in hell itself. How do you know all this? She asked. Because I've done it myself. Rowan's expression went distant. I've broken, rebuilt, broken again. Eventually you stop counting the fractures and just focus on staying vertical. What broke you? The war. What came after? He stood abruptly. Doesn't matter now. What matters is whether you're ready to stop defending and start fighting back. Against Blackthorn? Against everything. The weather, the threats, the people who think you can't hold this ground. Rowan's gray eyes were hard. You've been surviving. That's good. But surviving isn't enough. Eventually you have to win. How? By making Blackthorn's campaign cost more than this ranch is worth. By turning every attack into a liability. By showing the valley that fighting you is more expensive than leaving you alone. He grabbed his coat. And by finding allies who'll stand with you when things get bad. What allies? Everyone's terrified of Blackthorn. Not everyone. There are other small ranchers in this valley. Other families Blackthorn's choking out. They're scared and scattered, but they're still here. Rowan headed for the door. We find them, unite them, show them they're stronger together than alone. They won't listen to me. Then we make them listen. Rowan paused. Your father held this valley together for 20 years. People respected him, trusted him. That respect doesn't vanish because he died. It transfers to you. But only if you claim it. How do I do that? Rowan almost smiled. You stop asking permission and start giving orders. You're not the rancher's daughter anymore. You're the rancher. Act like it. He left her sitting with her father's journal and a challenge she didn't know how to meet. But as Evelyn read through her father's notes, decades of decisions, strategies, and hard-won wisdom, something began to shift inside her. Her father hadn't been perfect. He'd made mistakes, lost battles, struggled with the same doubts she carried now. But he'd never quit. And neither would she. The next morning, Evelyn rode into Red Hollow with Rowan at her side. She wore her father's coat, his rifle across her saddle, and an expression that made people step out of her way. They went straight to the saloon. The room fell silent when she walked in, not because she was a woman in a drinking establishment, but because she looked like she'd ridden straight out of a war and wasn't finished fighting yet. I need to speak to every rancher in this valley, Evelyn said, voice carrying to every corner. Every family Blackthorn's threatened, every operation he's tried to choke out. I want them here tomorrow night. Spread the word. The bartender stared. Miss Vale, I don't care what you think. Evelyn's eyes swept the room. My father held this valley together for 2 decades. He kept Blackthorn from owning everything. And now he's dead, and you're all sitting here waiting for the next person to save you. We're not. You are, because you're terrified. I understand. I'm terrified too. She let that land. But fear without action is just surrender in slow motion, and I'm done surrendering. Silence. Then one of the older ranchers, a weathered man named Dutch Callahan, stood up. What are you proposing, Miss Vale? A meeting, tomorrow night. Every small rancher in the valley. We talk about what Blackthorn's doing. We compare notes. We figure out if we're stronger together than alone. Evelyn met his eyes. My father would want us fighting as a valley, not dying as individuals. Dutch considered this. Blackthorn hears about this, he'll retaliate. He's already retaliating. He burned my barn 3 nights ago, killed 30 head of cattle, and he's not stopping with me. Every one of you has a story about fences cut, wells poisoned, supply wagons that never arrived. She gestured around the room. So we can keep taking it quietly, or we can stand up and make him pay for every inch. That's suicide, someone muttered. Maybe, Evelyn agreed, but I'd rather die fighting than live kneeling. My father taught me that, and if you knew him at all, you know he'd say the same thing. She turned and walked out, Rowan following like a shadow. They were halfway to their horses when Dutch caught up. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. Best friend I had in this valley. And you're right, he'd want us fighting together. So you'll come? I'll come. And I'll bring others. Dutch glanced at Rowan. But Miss Vale, you should know, Blackthorn's got the marshal, the judge, and half the valley's businesses in his pocket. Legal fight won't work. Then we don't fight legal. Evelyn swung into her saddle. We fight smart. Dutch almost smiled. You really are your father's daughter. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but for the first time since her father died, Evelyn felt something other than fear and exhaustion. She felt purpose. That night, as Rowan reinforced the fence lines and Evelyn inventoried their dwindling supplies, a rider approached from the south. Not one of Blackthorn's men, this one rode cautiously, hands visible, clearly not looking for a fight. Rowan had his rifle ready anyway. The rider stopped 30 yards out. I'm looking for Evelyn Vale. You found her. Evelyn stepped into the lantern light. State your business. Name's Marcus Webb. I run a small spread north of here. Heard you called a meeting for tomorrow night. News travels fast. Dutch Callahan's got a big mouth. Webb dismounted slowly, carefully. Look, I don't know you. Never met your father, but Blackthorn ran off my 2 best hands last month and poisoned my creek 2 weeks ago. I'm 3 bad days from losing everything. So I'm here to say I'll stand with you. Whatever you're planning. Webb's voice was steady despite his obvious fear. I'm tired of running, tired of losing ground to a man who thinks money gives him the right to take whatever he wants. Evelyn studied him. Young, maybe 30, scared but determined. The kind of man this valley needed. Tomorrow night, Red Hollow Saloon. Bring anyone else you know who's sick of Blackthorn's methods. I will. Webb hesitated. Miss Vale? People are saying you're crazy for fighting this, that you should just take his money and leave. People say a lot of things. They also say your father was the toughest son of a bitch in Montana, that he never backed down from a fight, even when he should have. Webb met her eyes. Seems like maybe that runs in the family. He rode away before Evelyn could respond. Rowan emerged from the shadows. You know what you're doing? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Fair enough. He checked the rifle's sight. Just so you know, uniting these ranchers makes you a bigger target. Blackthorn won't take this lying down. Good. I'm tired of being the only one he's shooting at. Rowan actually laughed. Your father would be proud. My father's dead. Doesn't mean he can't be proud. Rowan headed back to his patrol. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Evelyn stood alone in the cold Montana night, watching stars wheel overhead and thinking about her father's journal, about his final words, about holding the line. She'd spent 3 weeks running scared, defending what little ground she had left, waiting for the next disaster. No more. Tomorrow, she'd stop defending. Tomorrow, she'd start fighting back. And if Blackthorn wanted this ranch, he'd have to kill her for it. Behind her, the ruins of the barn smoldered against the night sky, a monument to everything she'd lost and a reminder of everything she refused to surrender. The war for Red Hollow Valley was just beginning, and Evelyn Vale had finally decided to fight it. 23 people showed up to the meeting. Evelyn had hoped for 15, maybe 20 if she was lucky. Instead, the Red Hollow Saloon was packed wall-to-wall with ranchers, farmers, mill workers, and families who'd driven wagons through freezing darkness to be there. Dutch Callahan arrived first, bringing 6 other ranchers from the northern valley. Marcus Webb came with his wife and two neighboring families. Even old Samuel Potts, the mercantile owner Rowan had suspected of collaboration, showed up looking nervous and angry in equal measure. They filled every table, lined the walls, and spilled out onto the porch where they could hear through open windows despite the cold. Evelyn stood at the front of the room, feeling every eye on her, suddenly aware that she'd called this meeting without any clear plan beyond getting people in the same room. Rowan leaned against the bar behind her, arms crossed, watching the crowd with those cold gray eyes. He'd told her this morning, get them angry enough to act, but smart enough not to get killed. Everything else is details. Helpful. Thank you for coming, Evelyn began, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. I know it wasn't easy. I know some of you took risks just being here. We're here because Dutch vouched for you, called out a rancher Evelyn didn't recognize. Said your father was the only honest man in this valley. That true? My father was honest and stubborn, and probably too proud for his own good. Evelyn met the man's eyes. But he never backed down from a fight, and he never let Blackthorn push him around. That's why Blackthorn wanted him dead. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. You got proof of that? Someone demanded. I've got 3 weeks of harassment, a burned barn, poisoned wells, and 30 dead cattle. Evelyn's voice hardened. But if you're asking whether I can prove it in court, the answer's no. Because Blackthorn owns the marshal and the judge. We all know it. We just don't say it out loud. More murmurs. Uncomfortable shifting. Dutch stood up. Let's stop dancing around it. We're all here because Blackthorn's been squeezing us dry for 2 years. Cut fences, stolen livestock, supply wagons that never arrive, water rights mysteriously transferred. Anyone here want to claim they haven't been hit? Silence. That's what I thought, Dutch continued. We've all been taking it quiet because we're scared. Because Blackthorn's got money, men, and connections we can't match. Because fighting back alone is suicide. He looked at Evelyn. But maybe Miss Vale's got a point. Maybe alone is the problem. What are you suggesting? Asked a woman from the back. That we form some kind of… what? Militia? Army. I'm suggesting we stop pretending we're not already at war, Evelyn said. Blackthorn declared it the day he started burning people out. We've just been losing because we're fighting separately. She gestured around the room. But look at this. 23 operations. How many head of cattle total? How many armed men? How many square miles of land? Combined? Marcus Webb did quick math. Maybe 8,000 acres, 300 head, 40, 50 men who can shoot. And Blackthorn's syndicate controls what, 15,000 acres? 1,000 head? Evelyn let that sink in. Those numbers aren't as far apart as we think. The difference is he acts like one operation, and we act like 23 individuals getting picked off one by one. So what do we do? Samuel Potts asked. Pool our resources? Share profits? That's complicated as hell, legally speaking. Not profits. Defense. Rowan spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. You don't need to merge operations. You need a mutual protection agreement. Someone gets hit, everyone responds. Someone's livestock gets stolen, everyone helps search. Someone's well gets poisoned, everyone shares water until it's fixed. That's asking a lot, someone muttered. It's asking for basic decency, Rowan shot back, which apparently needs asking in this valley. Who are you to I'm the man who's been watching Blackthorn's riders for 2 weeks, learning their patterns, counting their numbers, and I can tell you right now they're relying on you staying divided. Rowan's gray eyes swept the room. They've got maybe 20 hardcore gunmen, another 30, 40 hired hands who'll run at the first sign of real resistance. That's not an army, that's a gang. And gangs work by intimidation, not strength. You call their bluff, they fold. Or they escalate, Dutch said quietly. Start killing people instead of just property. They're already killing people, Evelyn said. Just slowly. How many ranches has Blackthorn bought this year? 6? 7? Where are those families now? Gone. Run out of the valley. That's not business. That's elimination. The room went quiet. My father saw this coming, Evelyn continued. That's why he never sold. Why he fought Blackthorn every step. Not because he was stubborn, but because he understood. Once Blackthorn owns this valley, he owns everyone in it. Your businesses, your families, your futures. Everything becomes his to control. So we fight back, said the woman from earlier. Then what? Blackthorn's got the law on his side. We can't win legally. Then we make it too expensive for him to win illegally, Rowan said. Every attack costs him men, resources, reputation. Eventually, crushing you costs more than leaving you alone. That's when you win. And how many of us die before then? The question came from a young rancher holding a baby. I've got a family, I can't just... You think surrendering protects them? Evelyn asked gently. You think Blackthorn gives good terms to people who fold? He buys you out for pennies, and you end up working your own land as his employee. Or you leave entirely, start over somewhere else with nothing. She paused. That's not protection, that's delayed death. The young rancher looked at his baby, then back at Evelyn. So we fight. And if we lose together, Dutch said, which is better than losing alone. Slowly, heads started nodding around the room. Samuel Potts cleared his throat. I'll help however I can. Supply discounts, credit extensions, information about what Blackthorn's buying, when he's buying it. He looked embarrassed. I've been playing both sides, trying to stay neutral. But there's no neutral when one side's trying to own everything. Anyone else? Evelyn asked. One by one, people spoke up. Offers of labor, equipment, knowledge. A woman offered her husband's old military maps of the valley. A blacksmith offered to forge tools and repair weapons. A family with medical training offered to treat injuries, no questions asked. Within an hour, they'd sketched out the bones of a defense network, shared lookouts, emergency signals, supply caches, and a commitment that any attack on one ranch would bring response from all others. It wasn't perfect. There were holes big enough to drive wagons through. But it was something. It was more than they'd had yesterday. As people filed out into the cold night, Dutch pulled Evelyn aside. You know this paints a target on your back bigger than anything before. I'm already a target. Now you're the leader of an uprising. That's different. Dutch's weathered face was serious. Blackthorn's going to come at you hard. Make an example. You ready for that? No, Evelyn admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Dutch almost smiled. You really are your father's daughter, stubborn to the point of suicide. He glanced at Rowan, who was watching from across the room. Your husband there, he's the real deal, isn't he? I've seen men like him before. The kind wars produce. He scares me sometimes, Evelyn said quietly. He should. Men like that are dangerous. Dutch headed for the door, then paused. But they're also exactly what you need right now. Just don't let him become what he's fighting. That's the trap with violent men. They're useful until they're not. He left before Evelyn could respond. She stood in the emptying saloon, watching people she'd just united against impossible odds, and wondered if she'd just saved them or sentenced them to death. Rowan appeared beside her. You did good. I gave them hope. That's not the same as doing good. Sometimes it is. He moved toward the door. Come on. We should get back before... Glass shattered. Evelyn spun to see a burning bottle arcing through the broken window, trailing fire like a comet. It hit the bar and exploded in a wave of flames that spread across spilled alcohol with terrifying speed. Out! Rowan shoved Evelyn toward the back exit. Now! They burst into the alley just as the saloon's front windows blew out in a blast of heat and smoke. People were screaming, running, trying to organize bucket brigades that were already too late. Rowan grabbed Evelyn's arm. That wasn't random. Blackthorn. Or someone who wants you to think it was Blackthorn. Rowan's eyes scanned the darkness. Either way, message received. They're not playing defensive anymore. The ride back to the ranch felt like riding through a graveyard. Every shadow could hide riders. Every sound could be the prelude to ambush. Evelyn's hand never left her rifle, and Rowan rode with his revolver drawn. They made it home without incident, but that somehow felt worse, like the real attack was still waiting. Inside, Evelyn paced the kitchen while Rowan checked every window lock for the third time. This is my fault, she said. I pushed too hard too fast. Now people could die. People were already dying, just quietly. Rowan poured coffee with hands that never shook. You didn't start this war. You just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. That doesn't make me feel better. It should, because the alternative was waiting until Blackthorn picked you off one by one. At least now you're fighting with numbers. Evelyn sank into a chair. What if I'm wrong? What if we can't win? Then you lose fighting instead of kneeling. Your father would have called that a worthy trade. My father's dead. Because he fought, not because he was wrong to fight. Rowan sat across from her. You want the truth? This valley was lost the moment people started thinking Blackthorn was inevitable. That's how tyrants win. Not with strength, but with the illusion of strength. They make you believe resistance is pointless, so you don't resist. And you think we can break that illusion? I think you already started. Rowan gestured toward town. 23 people showed up tonight. 23 people who were too scared to act alone but found courage in numbers. That's not nothing. That's how movements start. Movements get people killed. So does surrender. Just slower and with less dignity. Rowan's gray eyes were steady. You can't save everyone, Evelyn. Best you can do is give them a chance to save themselves. The words settled between them like stones. How do you live with it? Evelyn asked quietly. The possibility that your decisions get people killed. Rowan was silent for a long moment. You don't. You just keep moving forward and hope the living outnumber the dead when it's over. That's bleak. That's war. They sat in silence, drinking bitter coffee and listening to the wind howl around the house. Finally, Evelyn said, Tell me about the war. Your war. Rowan's jaw tightened. Why? Because you talk about violence like you're fluent in it, and I need to understand what we're really walking into. You don't want... Yes, I do. Evelyn leaned forward. You know things about survival I don't, about fighting, about what it takes to win against bad odds. So teach me. Start with whatever made you this way. Rowan stared into his coffee like it held answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. I was 17 when I enlisted. Thought it'd be adventure, glory, maybe a chance to matter. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turned out war wasn't glorious. It was mud, disease, and watching friends die for meaningless ground you'd lose the next day anyway. Which side? Doesn't matter. Both sides committed enough horror to fill graves for centuries. He looked up. I learned 3 things in those 4 years. First, violence is a language, and if you don't speak it fluently, someone who does will kill you. Second, loyalty matters more than righteousness. Third, survival requires becoming something you hate. Is that what you became? Yes, and I was good at it. Rowan's expression was unreadable. I scouted behind enemy lines, sabotaged supply routes, killed officers in their sleep. The things I did. He stopped. I saved lives by taking others. Told myself it was necessary. Maybe it was. But necessary doesn't mean clean. Evelyn absorbed this. And after the war, I tried to go home. Found out home didn't exist anymore. Family gone. Town didn't want me. Nobody wants a killer when the killing's done. He touched the scar across his throat. Got this in a bar fight 6 months after Appomattox. Someone recognized me from the war. Decided old grudges needed settling. Nearly succeeded. Who saved you? Your father. Rowan's voice softened slightly. He was passing through, saw the fight, stopped it before I bled out, paid for a doctor, asked me what I planned to do with my life. He smiled bitterly. I told him I didn't have one. He said that was perfect, because he needed someone who wasn't afraid to die protecting something worth protecting. So you worked for him, for 3 years. He taught me ranching, business, how to fight without becoming a monster again. Rowan met her eyes. He was the only person who ever looked at what I'd done and didn't flinch. Said war breaks everyone, but some people rebuild themselves into something better. Said I could be one of them if I chose. Did you choose? I'm still deciding. Rowan stood up. But that's why I'm here. Because your father gave me a chance when nobody else would. And because he was right, some things are worth protecting, even if the protecting costs everything. He walked out before Evelyn could respond, leaving her alone with new understanding of the man her father had sent. A killer trying to become something better. A weapon pointed at her enemies by a dead man's hand. And maybe, just maybe, exactly what she needed. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Rowan trained every man in the Valley network on basic combat tactics, how to fight from cover, how to move at night, how to set up ambush positions and escape routes. He was relentless, demanding, and utterly without sympathy for weakness. You want to survive, you practice until bleeding, he told a group of exhausted ranchers. Because when Blackthorn's men come, they won't give you time to think. You'll act on instinct, so we make your instincts right. Meanwhile, Evelyn organized the logistics, supply routes, communication systems, emergency protocols. She rode between ranches, establishing signal fires and cached weapons. She memorized every family's location, capability, and vulnerability. She became a general without meaning to, and the valley became an army without realizing it. On the fourth night, the attack came. Not against Evelyn's ranch, which they'd fortified into a small fortress. Instead, Blackthorn hit the weakest link, a small family spread on the valley's eastern edge, run by a widow named Catherine Morrison and her 3 teenage sons. The signal fire blazed red against the night sky. Evelyn saw it from her porch and was moving before thought caught up. "Rowan!" He was already saddling horses. "Morrison Place, 6 miles east. They've got maybe 10 minutes before—" "I know." Evelyn grabbed her rifle and ammunition. "Send riders to Dutch and Marcus. Tell them to converge from the north. We'll come from the west. Trap them between us." Rowan gave her a sharp look, surprised maybe at how quickly she'd shifted into tactical thinking. "And if they scatter before we arrive, then we track them." Evelyn swung into her saddle. No more letting them burn and run. Time to make it expensive. They rode hard through frozen darkness, Evelyn's heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The first real test of whether their network meant anything, whether people would actually ride into danger for strangers, whether courage could match cruelty. They crested the ridge above Morrison Ranch and Evelyn's breath caught. 8 riders surrounded the house, torches blazing. Catherine Morrison was on the porch with her sons, all armed, all terrified. The raiders were shouting demands. "Surrender the deed, sign over water rights, leave the valley by morning." "We go in quiet," Rowan said, already moving. "Circle from the south. Don't fire until I do. And for the love of— Stay alive, I know." Evelyn followed him down the ridge. They were 50 yards out when one of the raiders spotted them and shouted a warning. The siege broke into chaos. Raiders spinning toward the new threat. Morrison family diving for cover, horses screaming. Rowan's first shot took down the raiders' leader before the man cleared leather. His second shot shattered a torch, plunging half the yard into darkness. Evelyn fired at the raiders, trying to regroup, forcing them behind cover. She wasn't trying to kill anyone, not yet, just create confusion, make them think they were outnumbered. Then Dutch Callahan burst from the northern tree line with 6 armed men. Then Marcus Webb appeared from the east with 5 more. Suddenly, Blackthorn's raiders were surrounded by 20 guns and very limited options. "Drop your weapons!" Rowan's voice cut through the gunfire. "You're outgunned and surrounded. Drop them now or die here." For a moment, nothing happened. Then one raider threw down his rifle. Another followed. Within seconds, all 8 had surrendered, hands raised, eyes wild with panic. Evelyn dismounted slowly, rifle trained on the prisoners. Catherine Morrison emerged from the house, shaking but alive, her sons clustering around her. "You came," Catherine breathed. "I didn't think— I wasn't sure." "We came." Evelyn kept her eyes on the raiders. "And we'll keep coming, every time. That's the promise." Dutch walked over to the captured men. "Any of you boys want to give up your employer? Tell us who sent you." Silence. "Loyal men," Dutch observed. "Admirable. Stupid, but admirable." He looked at Rowan. "What do we do with them?" "Strip them," Rowan said calmly. "Weapons, horses, boots. Then let them walk back to Blackthorn in their underwear. Let him see what happens to his men now." "They'll freeze," one of the raiders protested. "Should have thought of that before you tried burning a widow's house." Rowan's voice was ice. "You want mercy? You're talking to the wrong people. We're fresh out." They took everything: guns, ammunition, horses, saddles, even the raiders' coats and boots. Left them shivering in the snow with a 15-mile walk back to Blackthorn's headquarters. "Tell your boss we're done being targets," Evelyn said as they left. "Tell him the valley's united now. Tell him every ranch he hits will bring 20 guns. And tell him we're not afraid anymore." The raiders stumbled away into darkness, and Evelyn turned to find every rancher staring at her. "That was a risk," Marcus said quietly. "Letting them go. Giving them a message to deliver." "It wasn't a risk. It was a declaration." Evelyn looked around at the assembled group. "We just proved we're not scattered individuals anymore. We're organized. We're fast. And we're willing to fight. That message is worth more than 8 dead raiders. Blackthorn won't see it that way, Catherine warned. Good. I want him angry. I want him scared. Evelyn's voice hardened. Because scared people make mistakes, and mistakes give us openings. They rode back in a loose convoy, the Morrison family safe in the middle, every gun loaded and ready. When they reached the Morrison ranch to help secure it for the night, Catherine pulled Evelyn aside. Your father would be proud, she said simply. He always said this valley needed someone to stand up to Blackthorn. Never thought it'd be his daughter. Neither did I, Evelyn admitted. But here you are anyway. Catherine smiled tiredly. That's what courage looks like. Showing up scared and doing it anyway. Back at her own ranch hours later, Evelyn collapsed into a chair, exhausted and wired in equal measure. They'd won. They'd actually won. But the cost of that victory was yet to be calculated. Rowan was cleaning his rifle when he said, You know this just made everything worse. I know. Blackthorn's going to escalate. Send more men. Hit harder targets. I know. People are going to die. I know. Evelyn looked at him. But they were going to die anyway. At least now they'll die fighting for something instead of just waiting to be crushed. Rowan considered this. You're learning. What? How to lead. How to make hard choices. He set down the rifle. Your father saw it in you. That's why he wasn't worried. He knew you'd figure it out when you had to. I don't feel like I'm figuring anything out. I feel like I'm drowning and pretending to swim. That's what leadership is. Drowning in public while acting like you've got it under control. Rowan almost smiled. You're doing better than you think. How would you know? Because people followed you tonight. Not because they had to, because they believed you were worth following. He stood up. That's not something you can fake. Either people believe or they don't. And tonight, they believed. He left her with those words, and Evelyn sat alone in the darkness thinking about belief and courage and the terrible weight of other people's hope. Somewhere in the valley, Silas Blackthorn was receiving word about the failed raid, about his men stripped and humiliated, about the ranchers organizing under Evelyn Vale's leadership, and somewhere in that same darkness, he was planning his response. Evelyn knew it would come soon, knew it would be brutal. But for the first time since her father died, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The war for Red Hollow Valley had entered a new phase. The defense was over. Now came the real fight, the kind that would determine who owned this land, who controlled its future, and who survived to see spring. Evelyn Vale had spent weeks learning to survive. Now it was time to learn how to win. Blackthorn's response came 5 days later, and it wasn't what anyone expected. No midnight raids, no burned barns, no terrorized families. Instead, a lawyer arrived from Helena with a stack of legal documents thick as a Bible and a smile that could freeze whiskey. His name was Theodore Whitmore, and he set up shop in the Red Hollow Hotel like he was settling in for a siege of his own. Miss Vale. He caught Evelyn outside the Mercantile 3 days after his arrival. I wonder if we might speak privately about your recent activities. Evelyn kept walking. I don't have anything to say to Blackthorn's lawyers. I represent the Blackthorn Cattle Syndicate, which is a legally incorporated entity operating under territorial charter. What you represent, Miss Vale, is considerably less clear. Whitmore fell into step beside her, unbothered by her coldness. Unlawful assembly, vigilante justice, theft of property. Those raiders you stripped had personal possessions worth considerable money, and let's not forget assault with deadly weapons. They attacked the Morrison Ranch. According to whom? Mrs. Morrison. Her testimony is hardly unbiased. Whitmore's smile widened. The men you assaulted claim they were simply passing through when your armed mob attacked without provocation. They're willing to testify under oath. Evelyn stopped walking. You're threatening to prosecute us for defending ourselves? I'm informing you of the legal realities. Mr. Blackthorn has been remarkably patient with your family's stubbornness. But patience has limits, especially when that stubbornness evolves into organized criminal activity. Criminal activity? Evelyn's voice was flat. Forming a militia without territorial approval, coordinating armed responses across multiple properties, detaining men against their will. These are serious charges, Miss Vale, the kind that could result in prison time. Or worse, federal intervention resulting in property seizure. So Blackthorn can't beat us straight, so he's trying to have us arrested. Mr. Blackthorn is trying to restore law and order to a valley that's rapidly descending into chaos. Whitmore pulled out a document. However, he's also a reasonable man. He's prepared to offer you an alternative. I'm not selling. The offer isn't purchase, it's partnership. Whitmore held out the paper. Merge your operation into the syndicate. Retain ownership of your land. Receive fair market compensation for cattle and equipment. Continue ranching under the Blackthorn brand with full autonomy over day-to-day operations. In exchange for what? In exchange for disbanding your vigilante network and acknowledging Mr. Blackthorn's authority over valley operations. Whitmore's voice turned harder. It's generous, Miss Vale. More generous than you deserve given your recent behavior. I'd suggest you take it before Mr. Blackthorn's patience runs out entirely. Evelyn took the document, glanced at it, then tore it in half. Tell Blackthorn he can take his partnership and— Careful. Whitmore's smile vanished. Threatening an officer of the court is yet another crime I could add to the growing list. Then add it. Evelyn stepped closer, and something in her eyes made the lawyer step back. Because I'm done pretending your boss is anything but a thief with good lawyers. He wants this valley? He'll have to take it the same way he's taken everything else, by force. But this time, we're going to make him bleed for every inch. She walked away before Whitmore could respond, her heart hammering but her step steady. Behind her, the lawyer called out, You're making a mistake, Miss Vale. One you'll regret very soon. Evelyn didn't look back. That night, she called an emergency meeting at Dutch Callahan's ranch. 15 people gathered in his barn, and Evelyn laid out what Whitmore had said. He's trying to intimidate us legally, Marcus Webb observed. Make us think we're the criminals. We knew Blackthorn owned the law, Dutch said. This shouldn't surprise anyone. It doesn't surprise me. It worries me. Evelyn looked around the assembled group. Because Whitmore's right about one thing, we're operating outside legal authority. If Blackthorn pushes for federal intervention, we could all face serious consequences. So what do we do? Catherine Morrison asked. Back down? Accept his partnership offer? No. The voice came from the back of the barn. Rowan stepped into the lamplight, and every head turned. We escalate. Escalate how? Dutch demanded. We're already pushing legal boundaries. Then we stop worrying about legal boundaries and start thinking strategically. Rowan moved to the center of the group. Blackthorn's using law as a weapon because he thinks it gives him leverage. We neutralize that leverage by making the cost of legal action higher than the cost of leaving us alone. Explain, Evelyn said. Blackthorn's operation depends on infrastructure, supply lines, water access, transportation routes, equipment. Rowan's gray eyes were cold. We start hitting those, nothing dramatic, nothing that creates civilian casualties, but enough to make his operation expensive and unreliable. You're talking about sabotage, Samuel Potts said slowly. I'm talking about asymmetric warfare. He's got more men, more money, more legal protection, but he's also got more to lose. We make him lose it piece by piece until crushing us costs more than tolerating us. That's terrorism, someone said. That's survival. Rowan's voice didn't rise. You want to play by rules, Blackthorn wrote? Fine. Keep losing. But if you want to win, you need to change the game entirely. Silence fell over the barn. Finally, Dutch spoke. What kind of targets are we talking about? Supply wagons, equipment depots, water pumps, fences on his property instead of ours. Rowan looked at Evelyn. We make his operation as difficult as he's made ours. Force him to spread his men thin, defending everything instead of attacking anything. That's a line, Catherine said quietly. Once we cross it, we already crossed it when we stripped his raiders. Evelyn's voice was steady. Whitmore made that clear. In Blackthorn's eyes, we're already criminals, so we might as well earn the title. Evelyn? Dutch started. No. She cut him off. I'm tired of playing defense. Tired of waiting for the next attack. Tired of pretending there's a legal solution to this. She looked around at faces she'd come to know over these brutal weeks. My father spent 20 years fighting Blackthorn's slow takeover, and he lost. Not because he wasn't strong enough, but because he kept believing the system would eventually work. The system's corrupt, Marcus said. Everyone knows it. Then why are we still pretending it isn't? Evelyn's frustration boiled over. Blackthorn owns the marshal, owns the judge, owns the lawyers and probably half the territorial legislature. Fighting him legally is like fighting a rigged card game by playing better cards. You can't win because the dealer's cheating. So we cheat back, Rowan said simply. Dutch stood up, pacing. You understand what you're asking? This isn't defending our homes anymore. This is active aggression. People could die. Not just Blackthorn's men. Our people. Your people. I know. Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. But they're dying anyway. At least this way we're fighting instead of waiting to be picked off. The debate raged for another hour. Some wanted to pull back, try negotiation. Others wanted full assault. Most were simply terrified and didn't know what they wanted beyond survival. Eventually they voted, 12-3 in favor of Rowan's strategy. The three who voted against, including one of Dutch's own men, left immediately. Evelyn didn't try to stop them. You couldn't force courage. Either people had it or they didn't. After they'd gone, Dutch pulled Evelyn aside. You know this is a point of no return, he said quietly. I know. Once you start hitting Blackthorn's operation directly, he'll respond with everything he's got. No more harassment, real violence. I know, Evelyn repeated. Dutch studied her face. You've changed. 3 weeks ago, you were a scared girl trying to hold her father's ranch. Now you're planning sabotage campaigns like a military commander. 3 weeks ago, I thought I could survive by being tough enough. Now I know survival requires being ruthless enough. Evelyn met his eyes. My father tried honorable resistance. It got him killed. I'm not making the same mistake. Just don't lose yourself in the process, Dutch warned. I've seen what war does to people. It changes them, sometimes into something they don't recognize anymore. Better to change than to die unchanged. Dutch had no answer for that. The first operation happened 2 nights later. Rowan, Evelyn, and 4 volunteers, Marcus Webb, Dutch's son James, and 2 brothers named Cole and Benjamin Foster, rode under cover of darkness toward one of Blackthorn's major supply depots 15 miles south. The depot was a converted barn holding equipment, feed, and supplies for the syndicate's operations across 3 valleys. It was guarded, but lightly, 2 men on rotation, neither expecting real trouble. We go in quiet, Rowan instructed as they approached. No killing unless absolutely necessary. We're not murderers, we're saboteurs. There's a difference. They split into pairs. Rowan and Evelyn would handle the guards. The others would handle the depot itself. Evelyn's heart hammered as they crept through shadows toward the first guard. She'd hunted deer, killed wolves, fired at raiders in self-defense. But this was different. This was premeditated, calculated, criminal. The guard never saw them coming. Rowan moved like smoke, covering the man's mouth while slamming him against the barn wall hard enough to stun but not kill. The guard slumped, unconscious but breathing. They tied him up, gagged him, and moved to the second guard. This one was more alert. He spotted Evelyn and reached for his rifle. She hit him with her own rifle butt before he could shout, the impact reverberating up her arms. The guard dropped like a stone. Nice, Rowan said quietly. I feel sick. You'll get over it. Come on. Inside the depot, Marcus and the others were already working. They didn't burn anything. Smoke would draw attention too quickly. Instead, they sabotaged. Poured sand into barrels of feed, cut harness leather in places that would fail under stress, broke axles on wagons, punctured water barrels. Everything looked intact but was functionally destroyed. By the time the guards woke up, they'd be 20 miles away. They rode back as dawn broke, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. How long before Blackthorn realizes? Marcus asked. 2-3 days, Rowan estimated. Long enough for the sabotaged equipment to start failing. By the time he figures out it was deliberate, we'll have hit 2 more targets. This is really happening, James Callahan said, voice awed and terrified. We're actually fighting back. We're surviving, Evelyn corrected. Fighting back implies we're trying to win. Right now, we're just trying not to lose. What's the difference? Benjamin Foster asked. Ask me in a month. Over the next 2 weeks, they hit 6 more targets. A water pump servicing Blackthorn's northern pastures. A equipment cache near Iron Creek. A supply wagon carrying feed and medicine. Every operation was surgical, calculated, designed to cost money and time without creating bodies. Blackthorn's operations started showing strain, delays, equipment failures, increasing costs, and increasing paranoia. His men began attacking random ranchers, convinced everyone was part of the sabotage network, which only drove more people to join Evelyn's growing resistance. By week 3, she had 30 reliable people and another 20 willing to help when needed. They weren't an army, but they were something. Then everything changed. Evelyn was returning from a supply run to Samuel Potts's mercantile when she found Rowan waiting on the porch, expression darker than she'd ever seen. What happened? Blackthorn knows. Rowan handed her a wanted poster. These went up in town this morning. Evelyn stared at her own face, rendered in crude illustration. The text below made her blood run cold. Wanted for sabotage, theft, and conspiracy. Evelyn Vale. $500, reward, dead or alive. There's one for me too, Rowan said. And Dutch, and Marcus. He's naming names, putting bounties on heads. He already did, and it's legal. Territorial law allows private bounties for criminal acts pending trial. Rowan's voice was grim. He's turned us into outlaws with paper and ink. Now every bounty hunter between here and California will be looking for us. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. How much time do we have? Days. Maybe a week before the first hunters arrive. After that, Rowan didn't finish. After that, we're hunted wherever we go. Yes. Evelyn looked at the poster again, at her face rendered as a criminal's, and felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd known this was coming. Known Blackthorn wouldn't accept sabotage quietly. But seeing it made real, seeing herself declared outlaw, seeing a price placed on her life, made the stakes brutally clear. We need to end this, she said quietly. How? I don't know. But we can't keep playing defensive forever. Eventually we run out of time, supplies, or luck. She met Rowan's eyes. What would it take to actually beat him? Not just survive. Win. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. You'd have to destroy his operation completely. Make it impossible for him to continue doing business in this valley. How? Take out his headquarters, his records, his supply infrastructure, everything he's built. Rowan's expression was serious. But that's not sabotage anymore. That's assault. And it would require going through every gun he's got. How many? 40, maybe 50 men if he calls in everyone. And we have 30 who can shoot, 20 who will actually fight when it matters. The math was brutal. But Evelyn had learned something over these weeks of war. Numbers weren't everything. Strategy mattered. Surprise mattered. Desperation mattered most of all. Where's his headquarters? The old Garrison Ranch, 20 miles south. He bought it 2 years ago, turned it into his command center. Rowan studied her face. You're not actually considering this. I'm considering everything. Because waiting for bounty hunters to kill us in our sleep isn't a plan. Attacking Blackthorn directly isn't a plan either. It's suicide. Maybe. Evelyn stood up. Call a meeting. Everyone. Tonight. I want to know what we're really capable of before I make any decisions. The meeting happened in an abandoned mine shaft 3 miles from any ranch. The kind of place no one would accidentally stumble across. 32 people showed up, including some Evelyn didn't recognize. We're outlaws now, she began without preamble. Blackthorn put bounties on our heads. $500 each for me, Rowan, Dutch, and Marcus. Smaller amounts for anyone else confirmed to be working with us. Murmurs rippled through the group. That means bounty hunters are coming. Could be here in days. And unlike Blackthorn's raiders, these won't be men we can intimidate or scare off. They're professionals who kill for money. So we run, someone said. Leave the valley, start over somewhere else. And give Blackthorn exactly what he wants? Dutch's voice was sharp. Let him win by default? Better than dying for pride. It's not pride. Evelyn's voice cut through the argument. It's principle. If we run now, we prove Blackthorn right. The property belongs to whoever's willing to be most brutal. That law means nothing. That justice is just a word. Justice is just a word, Marcus said quietly. At least in this valley. Then we make it mean something. Evelyn looked around at desperate, scared faces. I'm not asking anyone to stay and fight. If you want to leave, leave. Take your families, start over, and I'll understand completely. But I'm not running, because my father didn't spend 40 years building something just so I could surrender it to a man like Blackthorn. Your father's dead, someone pointed out. Not cruelly, just factually. I know, and I'll probably join him soon. Evelyn's voice was steady. But I'll die fighting for something I believe in. That's worth more than living as a coward. Silence. Then Catherine Morrison stood up. My husband died building our ranch. I'm not abandoning it because some rich man decides he wants my land. I'm staying. Me too, said James Callahan. One by one, people stood. Not everyone. 7 left immediately, unwilling to risk death. Evelyn didn't blame them. But 25 stayed. 25 people willing to fight impossible odds for principle over survival. It was, Evelyn thought, either the bravest or stupidest thing she'd ever witnessed. Probably both. All right, Rowan stepped forward. If we're doing this, we do it right. No half measures. We hit Blackthorn's headquarters with everything we've got. Destroy his records, his supplies, his command structure. Make it impossible for him to continue operating. That's a fortress, Dutch said. 40 men defending prepared positions. We'll be slaughtered. Not if we're smart. Rowan pulled out a hand-drawn map. I've scouted his compound 3 times. There are weaknesses. Blind spots. The guards rotate predictably. The armory is poorly protected, and most importantly, Blackthorn doesn't expect a direct assault. He thinks we're too scared. We should be, Marcus muttered. Fear's only useful if it keeps you alive, Rowan said. Otherwise, it's just another way to die slowly. They planned through the night. Routes of approach, timing, objectives, contingencies. It was insane, desperate, and their only real chance. By dawn, they had something resembling a plan. It wasn't good, but it was all they had. 3 days later, they gathered at the rally point 2 miles from Blackthorn's compound. 25 people, 40 guns between them, enough ammunition for one sustained fight. After that, they'd either win or die. Evelyn looked at the assembled group. Ranchers, farmers, families who'd decided courage mattered more than safety, and felt the weight of what she'd asked them to do. Last chance to back out, she said quietly. No judgment, no shame. Nobody moved. All right then. Evelyn checked her rifle one final time. Let's go end this. They moved through pre-dawn darkness like ghosts, splitting into 3 groups as planned. Rowan led the assault team. Dutch commanded the diversion. Marcus handled the extraction. Evelyn rode with Rowan because she'd be damned if she sent people to die while she waited in safety. They reached the compound perimeter as the sky began to lighten. Blackthorn's headquarters sprawled across a former ranch, main house, bunkhouses, barns, corrals. 40 men sleeping inside, confident in their numbers. About to learn that numbers weren't everything. On my signal, Rowan whispered. Remember, we're here to destroy the operation, not commit massacre. Disable when you can. Kill only when you must. The signal came 3 minutes later, a lantern flash from Dutch's position. Then all hell broke loose. The diversion team opened fire from the western ridge, drawing immediate response. Guards poured from the bunkhouses, confused and disorganized, rushing toward the gunfire, leaving the compound's eastern approach undefended. Rowan's team moved in fast. They reached the main house before anyone realized what was happening. Inside, they found what they needed: Blackthorn's office, records, ledgers, legal documents, everything. Burn it, Rowan ordered, all of it. They worked quickly, piling papers and dousing them with lamp oil. The fire spread fast, hungrily consuming decades of legal theft made respectable through paperwork. Then someone shouted a warning. Blackthorn's men had realized the diversion was a feint. They were coming back, angry and armed. Out! Rowan shoved people toward the exit. Move now! They ran through smoke and chaos, bullets chasing them into darkness. Behind them, the main house erupted into full inferno, flames climbing into the dawn sky. Evelyn was halfway to the horses when she saw him. Silas Blackthorn himself, standing in the doorway of a burning barn, face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. Their eyes met across 50 yards of burning compound. Blackthorn raised his rifle. Evelyn raised hers faster. The shot echoed across the valley. Blackthorn staggered backward into the flames. Whether she'd hit him or he'd simply stumbled, Evelyn didn't wait to find out. She ran for her horse, Rowan's voice screaming her name, the entire compound erupting into violence behind her. They rode hard through growing light, bullets snapping at their backs, the entire valley seemingly on fire. Behind them, Blackthorn's headquarters burned like a funeral pyre. And ahead, somewhere in the uncertain dawn, waited either freedom or death. Evelyn Vale had finally stopped surviving. She'd started fighting to win. And she'd just made the most dangerous man in Montana into her mortal enemy. They didn't stop riding until the horses were ready to collapse. 20 miles north of Blackthorn's burning compound, Evelyn finally pulled up in a clearing surrounded by pine trees thick enough to hide an army. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dismount. "Did I hit him?" she asked Rowan. "Blackthorn, did I don't know." Rowan was checking the other riders for injuries. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. If he's dead, but if he's dead, this gets easier. If he's alive, we still accomplished the mission." Rowan's voice was maddeningly calm. Either way, his operation just lost everything that made it legitimate. Records, contracts, legal documents, all ash. He's crippled. Evelyn looked at the 23 people who'd survived the assault. 2 were missing. James Callahan and one of the Foster brothers hadn't made it to the extraction point. "We need to go back," she said. "James and Benjamin are either dead or captured," Dutch said, his voice hollow. "My son knew the risks. We all did. That doesn't mean we abandon. It means we don't throw away their sacrifice by getting killed in a rescue attempt." Dutch's face was carved from stone. James wouldn't want that. Neither would Benjamin. The words hung in the cold morning air like an indictment. They'd won. They'd actually damaged Blackthorn's empire in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. But the cost was carved into Dutch's face, into the exhausted terror in everyone's eyes, into the 2 empty saddles that would never be filled again. "We need to scatter," Marcus said. "Get people to safe locations before Blackthorn sends everyone he's got after us." "No." Evelyn's voice cut through the exhaustion. "We stay together. The moment we scatter, we're vulnerable again. Easier to pick off individually. Staying together makes us a target. We're already a target. At least together we can defend each other." Evelyn looked around at faces she'd come to know through weeks of shared terror. "We go to my ranch. It's the most defensible position in the valley. We fortify it, prepare for siege, and we wait." "Wait for what?" Catherine Morrison asked. "For Blackthorn to make his next move. For territorial authorities to investigate the fire. For something to break in our favor." Evelyn's jaw set. "Or we make our stand there and take as many of his men with us as we can." It wasn't a good plan, but nobody had a better one. They rode to the Vale Ranch in a tight convoy, weapons ready, every shadow a potential ambush. But no attack came. Either Blackthorn's forces were too disorganized, or they were planning something bigger. Evelyn suspected the latter. At the ranch, they immediately began fortifications. Rowan had taught them well over the past weeks how to create firing positions, establish overlapping fields of fire, prepare escape routes. The ranch transformed into a fortress within hours, but a fortress was just a prettier word for trap. "How long can we hold?" Evelyn asked Rowan as they reinforced the barn's remaining walls. "Depends on how many men Blackthorn sends, and how badly he wants us dead." Rowan hammered another board into place. "We've got ammunition for maybe 2 sustained engagements, food for a week if we ration, water as long as the creek doesn't freeze. So we could survive a siege. We could survive the logistics of a siege. Whether we survive the actual fighting is another question." He looked at her. "You understand we might not walk away from this. I've understood that since the day you showed up." Evelyn watched the sun sink toward the mountains. "But I'd rather die here fighting than live somewhere else wondering if I could have won. Your father would say the same thing. My father's dead because he said things like that. No. Your father's dead because he was sick and old and his body gave out." Rowan's voice was quiet but firm. Everything you've done, he'd be proud of it, even the parts that scare you." "How do you know?" "Because he told me. The night before he died." Rowan set down his hammer. "He said you had more courage than you believed. Said the only thing holding you back was fear of becoming him, someone who spent their whole life fighting and died with nothing but scars to show for it." Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. "He really said that?" "Word for word. He was worried you'd try to be softer than this valley allows, worried you'd mistake cruelty for strength." Rowan met her eyes. "But he was wrong. You're exactly as hard as you need to be. And that's not cruelty. That's survival with teeth." Before Evelyn could respond, a shout went up from the perimeter. "Riders approaching! Single horse!" Everyone grabbed weapons, taking positions. But as the rider came into view, Evelyn's breath caught. It was James Callahan. He was barely conscious, slumped in the saddle, covered in blood. Dutch ran to catch him as he fell, lowering his son to the ground with shaking hands. James! James, stay with me! Benjamin's dead, James gasped. Shot during the retreat. I tried to get him out, but don't talk. Save your strength. Dutch was already checking wounds, his face gray. Catherine Morrison, who'd done field medicine during the war, took over. Bullet wound, left shoulder, clean through, missed the bone. He'll live if we stop the bleeding. As Catherine worked, James grabbed his father's shirt. Dad, you need to know, Blackthorn's alive, wounded but alive, and he's gathering every man he's got, 50, maybe 60 guns. They're coming here. When? Rowan demanded. Tomorrow, maybe sooner. James coughed blood. He's not playing games anymore. He's bringing an army. The words settled over the group like a death sentence. 60 men, against their 23, with 2 wounded and everyone exhausted from the assault. The math was brutally simple. We should run, someone said. Get out while we still can. Run where? Evelyn's voice was sharp. We're outlaws with bounties on our heads. The moment we leave this valley, we're hunted everywhere. At least here we know the ground. At least out there we'd be alive. Would we? Evelyn spun to face the speaker. Blackthorn has connections from here to California. He'll hunt us until we're dead or broken. The only safety is through him, not around him. So we fight 60 men with 23. We fight 60 men with strategy, preparation, and the advantage of defending ground we know better than anyone. Evelyn looked at Rowan. Can we win? Define win. Survive. Make Blackthorn's victory cost so much he gives up. Rowan considered this. Maybe, if we're smart, lucky, and willing to do things that'll haunt us afterward. What kind of things? The kind your father would have hated. The kind that cross lines you don't uncross. Rowan's expression was dark. You sure you want to know? Evelyn thought about her father's grave, about James bleeding on the ground, about Benjamin Foster who'd never go home, about 23 people who'd chosen to stand with her despite every rational argument against it. Tell me. Rowan laid it out, and with every word, Evelyn felt something inside her shift. This wasn't defense anymore. This wasn't even asymmetric warfare. This was something darker, the kind of tactics desperate people used when survival meant abandoning every principle except the will to live. When he finished, the group was silent. That's savage, Dutch said finally. That's war, Rowan corrected. The kind you win by making the other side decide victory isn't worth the cost. My father wouldn't have approved, Evelyn said quietly. Your father's not here. Rowan's voice wasn't cruel, just factual. You are. And you have to decide, do you want to die honorably or live with choices that'll keep you awake at night? Evelyn looked around at faces waiting for her decision. People who'd followed her this far. People who deserved a leader willing to do whatever it took. We do it, she said. All of it. They worked through the night, preparing traps that would have made frontier scouts proud and military commanders horrified. Pitfalls disguised with snow. Tripwires attached to hunting rifles. Deadfalls waiting to crush anything beneath them. Fire channels carved into frozen ground and filled with oil. The ranch became a killing field disguised as a homestead. As dawn approached, Catherine Morrison found Evelyn staring at the preparations. Having second thoughts? 1,000 of them. Evelyn didn't look away from the traps. My father built this ranch to create life, raise cattle, support a family. Now I'm turning it into a grave. You're turning it into a fortress. There's a difference. Is there? Evelyn finally looked at the older woman. Or am I just telling myself that so I can sleep at night? Catherine was quiet for a moment. My husband died building our ranch. You know what his last words were? Don't let them take it. Not, I love you, or take care of the boys, just don't let them take it. She smiled sadly. I used to think that was tragic. Now I understand. He wasn't talking about land. He was talking about principle, about not letting cruelty win just because it's easier than fighting back. Did it help, understanding that? No, but it let me live with the choices I made afterward. Catherine touched Evelyn's shoulder. You're doing what needs doing. That's all anyone can ask. She walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with her conscience and her traps. Blackthorn's army arrived at midday. 63 men, to be precise. Evelyn counted them from the second-floor window as they assembled on the ridge overlooking her ranch. They had rifles, horses, supplies for an extended siege, and the confidence of overwhelming numbers. They also had Silas Blackthorne himself, arm in a sling but very much alive, sitting his horse like a conquering general. "Miss Vale," his voice carried across the frozen valley, "I'm offering you one final chance. Surrender yourself and your accomplices. Face trial for your crimes, or we come in and extract you by force. Your choice." Evelyn opened the window. "I've got a counteroffer, Blackthorne. You leave this valley and never come back, or we make this the most expensive piece of land you ever tried to steal." Blackthorne actually laughed. "Brave words from a woman surrounded by my men. Look around, Miss Vale. Count the rifles pointed at your home. You're outnumbered 3-1. This is over." "Then come take it." The words hung in the cold air like a thrown gauntlet. Blackthorne's smile faded. "So be it. Men, burn them out." The attack began with rifle fire meant to suppress any defense. Bullets shattered windows, splintered wood, filled the air with the scream of violence given form. But Evelyn's people weren't at the windows. They were in positions Rowan had carefully prepared. Angles Blackthorne's men couldn't see, couldn't target, couldn't suppress. The first of Blackthorne's riders advanced confidently, 30 strong, charging the ranch like they were routing frightened settlers. They hit the first trap line 70 yards out. Pitfalls opened beneath horses. Animals screamed, riders flew, chaos erupted. Those who avoided the pits hit tripwires that triggered rifles firing from concealed positions. More men fell. The charge broke into confusion. "Pull back!" Blackthorne's voice was fury and disbelief. "Regroup!" They retreated, leaving 8 men dead or wounded in the snow, 55 left. The second attack came more cautiously, dismounted men advancing with cover, trying to reach the ranch buildings. Professional. Tactical. They made it 40 yards before hitting the fire channels. Rowan lit the oil from a sheltered position, and flames erupted across frozen ground in a wall of heat and smoke. Men caught in the blast ran screaming. Others retreated, pressed back by heat and terror. 47 left. The third attack was pure rage. Blackthorne threw everything at the ranch simultaneously. Men from 3 directions, suppressing fire from the ridge, even attempts to burn them out with fire arrows. This time, they reached the buildings. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in the barn, the bunkhouse, the spaces between structures. Evelyn fired her rifle until it was empty, then drew her father's revolver. She shot a man trying to climb through a window, clubbed another with the gun butt, saw Rowan moving through smoke like death itself, protecting her flank with terrifying efficiency. Marcus Webb went down with a bullet in the leg. Catherine Morrison took a knife wound defending the medical station. Dutch Callahan killed 3 men trying to burn the main house, then collapsed from exhaustion. The battle raged for 2 hours that felt like days. When Blackthorne finally called retreat, both sides were bloodied, exhausted, and running low on ammunition. 31 of Blackthorne's men were dead or too wounded to fight. 6 of Evelyn's people would never fight again. 3 more were injured but alive. Night fell over a battlefield littered with the cost of principle. Evelyn stood among the carnage, hands shaking, covered in blood that wasn't all hers, and felt something break inside her that would never fully heal. "We won," Marcus said weakly from where Catherine was treating his leg. "Did we?" Evelyn looked at the bodies, at the wounded, at the ranch her grandfather built, now scarred by violence it was never meant to see. Rowan appeared beside her, blood on his face and death in his eyes. "Blackthorne still has 32 men. We have 17 who can fight. He'll attack again tomorrow. Can we survive another assault?" "No." The word was simple and final. "Then we end it tonight," Evelyn said. "How?" "I go to Blackthorne alone, make him an offer." "That's suicide. It's the only move we have left." Evelyn looked at Rowan. "You taught me asymmetric warfare. The whole point is making victory cost more than defeat. Well, Blackthorne's lost 40 men trying to take this ranch. If I offer him a way to win without losing more, he might take it. Or he might just shoot you. Then at least it ends." Rowan grabbed her arm. "Your father sent me here to keep you alive. My father's dead because he spent his whole life fighting battles he couldn't win. I won't make the same mistake." Evelyn pulled free. "If I can end this without more people dying, I have to try." She walked into the darkness before anyone could stop her. The ride to Blackthorn's camp took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Her heart hammered, her hands shook, and every shadow looked like death waiting. But she rode anyway, because courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed doing despite the fear trying to stop you. Blackthorn's guards almost shot her before she identified herself. They dragged her into camp, threw her at their leader's feet, and waited for orders to execute. Blackthorn stared down at her, arm in a sling, face carved with exhaustion and fury. "You've got stones, I'll give you that, coming here alone. I came to make a deal. You're in no position to negotiate. Neither are you." Evelyn met his eyes. "You've lost 40 men trying to take one ranch, 40 families who will be asking why their husbands and sons died for your greed. How long before your remaining men start wondering if this is worth it?" Blackthorn's jaw tightened. "I have resources." "You had resources. Your headquarters is ash. Your records are destroyed. Your legal legitimacy is gone. Right now, you're just a rich man with hired guns." Evelyn stood up slowly. "And hired guns stop fighting when it costs more than it pays. What are you offering?" "A draw. You leave this valley, take your men, your operation, go build your empire somewhere else. In exchange, I don't spend the rest of my life hunting you for revenge. That's not a deal. That's surrender. No, surrender would be me handing you my land. This is me offering you a way to cut your losses before you lose everything." Evelyn's voice hardened. "Because if you attack tomorrow, I'll fight until every person in that ranch is dead. And then your surviving men will ask why 32 of them died for land that's been burned and booby-trapped into uselessness. They'll ask if you're a leader or just a stubborn old man who got them killed for pride." Silence fell over the camp. One of Blackthorn's men shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged glances. Blackthorn saw it. The moment doubt crept into his army. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "I think we've both lost enough that winning doesn't mean anything anymore." Evelyn's exhaustion bled through. "I just want this over. No more death. No more burning. Just over." Blackthorn studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. "Your father was a stubborn bastard, but you're something else entirely." He shook his head. "All right, Miss Vale. You've earned your draw. We leave at dawn. The valley's yours." He leaned forward. "But understand, this isn't mercy. This is pragmatism. And if I ever see you outside this valley, if our paths ever cross again, this truce ends. Clear? Crystal. Then get out of my camp before I change my mind." Evelyn rode back to her ranch, barely believing she was alive. Rowan met her at the property line. "Well?" "He's leaving. Dawn. It's over." Rowan stared at her. "You negotiated a retreat from Silas Blackthorn. I made him realize winning wasn't worth the cost." Evelyn dismounted, suddenly so tired she could barely stand. "That's not victory. That's just survival dressed up as success. It's what we needed. That's enough." The words should have felt like comfort. Instead, they felt like ash. That night, they buried their dead on the hillside next to Evelyn's father. 6 more crosses. 6 more lives spent proving a point about principle and property. Benjamin Foster. Sarah Chen, a rancher's daughter who'd fought like she had nothing to lose. 2 men whose names Evelyn barely knew, but whose faces would haunt her forever. And 2 more who'd died defending a home that wasn't even theirs. Dutch stood over his son's grave. James had died from his wounds 3 hours earlier, and said nothing. Just stared at frozen ground that had claimed too many good people. Evelyn wanted to say something profound, something that would make the deaths mean something beyond brutal mathematics. But words felt obscene next to fresh graves. So she just stood there, one more survivor carrying weight that would never fully lift. True to his word, Blackthorn left at dawn. His remaining men rode out in a column that looked more like retreat than strategic withdrawal. They took their wounded, their dead, and their shattered confidence. The valley watched them go in silence. Within a week, territorial authorities arrived to investigate the burned compound and reports of violence. Evelyn met them with Dutch, Marcus, and Rowan at her side. "Looks like you folks had quite a war," the lead marshal said, surveying the damage. "Self-defense," Evelyn said calmly. Blackthorn's men attacked us repeatedly. We defended ourselves, with what looks like military tactics and considerable casualties, with whatever it took to survive. Evelyn met his eyes. Are you here to investigate crimes or arrest people for refusing to be victims? The marshal considered this. Blackthorn filed charges: sabotage, arson, murder. Blackthorn's charges died when his headquarters and all his documentation burned down. Rowan's voice was cold. Without records, he's got no proof of property claims, no legal standing to file charges, nothing but accusations from a distance. That's convenient. That's war. Dutch spoke for the first time. We didn't start it, but we damn well finished it. The marshal looked between them, clearly weighing politics against justice. Finally, he sighed. I'll report that we found evidence of mutual conflict with no clear aggressor. Recommend the territorial government issue a general pardon to prevent further violence. That's generous, Evelyn said carefully. That's pragmatic. This valley's been bleeding for 2 years. Somebody had to stop it. The marshal tipped his hat. Congratulations, Miss Vale. You just became the most dangerous woman in Montana. They left that afternoon. Spring came slowly to Red Hollow Valley. Snow melted, grass returned. The land began the long process of healing from winter's brutality. The ranches that had banded together stayed connected. They formed a cooperative, pooling resources, sharing labor, defending each other against any threat. What Blackthorn's greed had accidentally created, necessity had forged into something stronger. The valley belonged to its people again, but the cost was carved into every survivor. Dutch Callahan never smiled again after James's death. He worked his ranch with quiet intensity, teaching his remaining sons everything James never got to learn. Catherine Morrison remarried within a year, a widower from the next valley who'd also lost family to Blackthorn's campaign. They built something new from shared grief. Marcus Webb took over the cooperative's logistics, turning his organizational skills into the valley's greatest asset. And Evelyn stood on her porch 6 months after the final battle, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. The ranch was thriving. The cattle had survived winter. The valley was peaceful. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. Rowan found her there as darkness fell. Regrets? 1,000. Evelyn didn't look at him. I did what I had to do, made the hard choices, saved the ranch, saved the valley, and I'd do it all again if I had to. But that doesn't mean it doesn't cost something. Like what? Like the person I was before. The girl who thought problems had clean solutions, who believed in justice and fairness and things making sense. She finally looked at him. That girl died somewhere between my father's grave and Blackthorn's retreat, and I don't know if what replaced her is better or just harder. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Your father once told me something I didn't understand until recently. He said the frontier doesn't make you stronger. It just burns away everything that isn't strong enough to survive. What's left might be hard, might be scarred, but it's real, and real is worth more than soft. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to remind you that you're still here, still fighting, still human, despite everything that tried to break you. Rowan gestured at the valley. You saved this. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but you saved it. That counts. Does it count enough to balance 6 graves? I don't know. Ask me in 20 years when we see what grows from the ground they died protecting. The words settled between them like stones. I'm glad you stayed, Evelyn said quietly. Even though the contract's fulfilled, even though you could leave any time. Where would I go? Rowan's voice carried something that might have been warmth. Everything worth protecting is right here. He meant the valley. Evelyn understood he also meant her. They stood together watching darkness claim the land, 2 people who'd survived winter and war and discovered something neither expected. Not love in the romantic sense, at least not yet. That would come later, slowly, built on shared understanding and mutual respect. But partnership, trust, the kind of connection forged in fire and impossible to break. The ranch her grandfather built, her father defended, and she'd fought to keep became something more than property. It became proof that courage could outlast cruelty, that ordinary people pushed hard enough could do extraordinary things, and that sometimes survival was its own kind of victory. A year later, the territorial legislature officially recognized the Red Hollow Valley Ranchers Cooperative, making it the first legally protected mutual defense organization in Montana Territory. Evelyn testified at the hearing, telling the story of Blackthorn's campaign and their resistance. Her words became legend, not because they were poetic or inspiring, but because they were true. "We didn't fight for glory," she told the legislators. "We fought because we had no other choice, because surrender meant losing everything our families built, because sometimes the only way to keep what's yours is to defend it with everything you have." The vote passed unanimously. 2 years after that, Rowan and Evelyn married, not because a contract said they should, but because partnership had evolved into something deeper, something neither had expected but both wanted. 5 years later, they had a daughter, named her Grace after her grandmother, taught her to shoot, to read, to understand that strength came in many forms. And 10 years after the winter that changed everything, Evelyn stood on the same porch where she'd once counted her father's failures, watching her daughter play in grass that grew over old battlefields. The valley was thriving. The cooperative protected dozens of families. Blackthorn's empire had collapsed entirely. He died broke and forgotten in a Helena boarding house, a cautionary tale about greed destroying itself. "You did it," Rowan said, appearing beside her as he always did. "Built something that lasted." "We did it," Evelyn corrected. "The valley did it. Everyone who stayed and fought and refused to quit. Your father would be proud. My father would probably say we got lucky." Evelyn smiled. "But he'd also say luck is what happens when courage refuses to surrender. So maybe we earned it after all." They stood together watching the future they'd fought for take shape in the form of children playing, cattle grazing, families building lives without fear. The frontier had taken everything it could from Evelyn Vale, her father, her innocence, her belief that the world was fair. But it hadn't taken her courage, hadn't broken her spine, hadn't crushed her spirit. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Not the land she'd saved, not the enemy she'd defeated, but the person she'd become in the process. Scarred but standing, hard but human, tested beyond breaking and still somehow intact. The woman who'd learned that survival sometimes required cruelty, that leadership meant carrying impossible weight, and that the hardest battles weren't fought with bullets, but with the daily choice to keep going when everything argued for giving up. That woman stood on her porch, held her husband's hand, watched her daughter play, and understood something her father never quite managed. The fight wasn't the point. The life you built after the fighting stopped? That was the point. Everything else was just the cost of getting there. And as the sun set over Red Hollow Valley, painting the mountains in shades of gold and shadow, Evelyn Vale finally allowed herself something she'd forgotten how to feel. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose fulfilled. The valley her grandfather claimed, her father defended, and she fought to save would belong to her daughter now. And her daughter's children. And everyone who came after, building lives on ground bought with courage and held through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. That was legacy. That was victory. That was enough.